In 1943 Rome, one simple, seemingly unimportant bakery fills with grunting and screaming. One of the young Jewish workers tries to get away from his co-worker, and in an attempt to protect himself, his mind is taken over by some primal fear mode. When the knife is put into action, he commits murder and, breathing heavily, sneaks out of the bakery in a hurry. Pacing the streets, he leaves marks on the walls of the buildings and, desperate, runs as quickly as possible. At this point, we are transported back into modern-day Rome. Giovanna and Filippo, a long-wed couple, are walking down the street after grocery shopping, fighting over an incident that took place at the cashier. The way in which they argue with one another is not necessarily helpful. The main complaint that Giovanna has is that her husband never sticks out for her. He doesn't get out of his way to protect her, and instead, he prefers to stand by and be ashamed of his wife's actions when she has a conflict with someone. Before this issue could be resolved or closed, Giovanna suddenly realized that her husband had stopped and was speaking with some old man in the street. After approaching, she learns that the old man is lost and confused. He has lost all his memory and now has no idea who he is or where to go. Giovanna stresses that they cannot possibly help him out. They don't know what to do in this situation. So after a couple of seconds, Giovanna starts walking away and Filippo paces after. Just before they get into their car, however, they notice that the old man is following them. This is when Filippo finally decides to stick out for him. Soon, the couple is taking the old man to a police station near their apartment. Giovanna is not so happy about it, but Filippo is quite motivated to help the elderly out. Once they get home, Giovanna gets upstairs together with Emine, their neighbor who babysits their children, and 3 yelling kids. Here, we get a glimpse into the colorful and diverse life of the neighborhood. Firstly, there is a man often undressing behind the open curtains of the facing window of Giovanna's kitchen. Secondly, there is a terrible, chaotic, and hostile family living upstairs. And thirdly, Emine is living with an African-American man and 2 children who are also of the same race. Filippo comes back home in the late evening. The children cheer up after his arrival, but Giovanna's day becomes that much worse. Walking out into the entranceway, she sees the old man standing like a tree. As it turns out, the police couldn't do anything with him, and now Filippo promises that he will take care of him after the football game. Giovanna knows that that won't happen. Another responsibility has just landed on her shoulder, and she wants it out of it immediately. The dinner table is silent in the next scene. The children smile at the old man, and the old man smiles back. After a long session of friendly stare-downs, the old man finishes his plate with the appetite of a wolf. It is the children who learn his name later that night. It seems to be Simone, and he seems to be so exhausted that he is passed out on the sofa in the living room. Giovanna doesn't trust him. She wants him out of here immediately, but Filippo cares for him too much. Finally, the man is left wherever he is for the night. Before going to sleep in a few minutes, Giovanna stands in her dark kitchen and peeks over at the facing window. It is like a passageway to another world. Once she gets back to bed, we learn that the married couple has a chance to sleep together only once a week thanks to Filippo's work schedule. Naturally, he is determined to use this time accordingly. And even though there are issues that trouble Giovanna a lot in this moment, passion takes over her as well. This component doesn't seem to be lost in the couple's life so far. Very early that morning, before the break of dawn, we see the whole family sleeping in one bed. Quite creepily, Simone is standing at the door, looking at them with the same confused look. The next morning, Giovanna goes to work in a better mood because Filippo promises to make Simone leave today. After getting back, however, she sees that not only is he still there, but he also bought a quite expensive gift for the kids. Giovanna is enraged. He doesn't even know how to express her anger to Filippo, who has clearly broken his promise to take care of Simone's problem. Finally, Filippo manages to make her look like a monster who is ready to throw out an innocent, helpless man. That evening, that innocent, helpless man watched her cook for the pub downstairs and gave her quite a bit of knowledge. As it turns out, the man knows everything about baking, but he fails to remember how and from whom he acquired that knowledge. Hopeful that this might be a clue the police might need, Giovanna takes him down to the police station herself in the next scene. Simone doesn't complain. When Giovanna exits the car to drop off her pastry in the pub, however, he sneaks out and wanders off into the streets heedlessly. Thankfully, the man who Giovanna often sees in the facing window notices him and informs Giovanna that he's gone. As the two come out to look for him, they have a conversation for the first time. His name seems to be Lorenzo, and he gets interested in Simone's case. The fact that the police left him in their care is surprising to him. Soon, after speaking about Simone's case for a while, Giovanna tells him that he's been too kind and points out that she should continue the search alone. right in that moment. However, Lorenzo notices Simone, sitting just a few feet from them. The man is totally silent. Giovanna urges him to stand up and follow him to the police station, where they might already have found out where he lives. But Simone doesn't respond to anything. Finally, Lorenzo offers to give them a ride to the station. As he says, his car is parked nearby, and 2 people are better than 1. And so, the duo takes Simone to the station. Giovanna is extremely grateful that the man is sparing so much of his time to help her out. She is expressing that gratitude when suddenly Simone hallucinates that a woman is running after them. The appearance of this woman clearly has a special place in the old man's lost memory and sense of self. The proof of this is just how upset Simone gets. Abruptly, he finds it tough to breathe and asks for screams to stop the car. Right away, as he starts wandering away, he continues to see hallucinations. This time he hears a coarse German monologue, echoing in the streets, where a little girl is standing and gazing at him intently. As he approaches her, he suddenly hears the screaming of a woman who is being taken away by special agents. This time, his heart fails to take the stress. Covering his ears, he manages to return to reality. In the next scene, the trio sits down at a cafe, where Simone shows that he is still partly living in the past. As Giovanna and Lorenzo begin a conversation about their jobs, he sees a man sitting by their table who is not really there. When this vision of a man stands up and walks away, Simone paces after him as well. As he takes a few steps, the woman who is running along their car in the street runs into him as well. Terrified, she seems to be looking for her daughter, who might have been taken away by the repressive machine as well. The vision of the woman fades away more quickly than the vision of the man. This latter brings Simone to a closed-down shop. When Giovanna and Lorenzo get to him, he is pounding on it continuously in a half-unconscious, desperate state. Even though the memory might be gone, the sight of the street is clearly eliciting a very strong emotional response. That night, Giovanna takes him back to her apartment. After she shows Simone his new clothes, Lorenzo gives her a call. As it seems, the man has been looking over to her apartment as often as she has. Once Giovanna walks over to the kitchen and sees him looking at her from the facing window, Lorenzo starts telling her about the moment he first saw Simone that night. In a romantic, literary manner, with a whispering voice and calm tone, he says that the old man jumped on him and, as if he were his old love, started talking dramatically to him, seeing his love in the place of Lorenzo. The old man seems to have spoken of an impossible love, that nobody would accept the love that must bloom silently and secretly, and the love without which the world would lose all meaning. In particular, Lorenzo might be speaking of the love he feels towards a certain someone. And since this is a possibility, Giovanna's heart begins beating in a way that it has never beaten before. Her mind listens to Lorenzo, and it hears the story about the emotional outbreak of a man who has Korsakoff syndrome. Her heart, however, paints quite a different picture, as if the narrative of the impossible love was directly connected to her. Emerging out of this conversation, Giovanna enters the bathroom and finds Simone sitting at the exact spot where she left him. Realizing that the man won't be able to undress himself, she helps him out and finds a number tattooed on her left wrist. As it turns out, Simone is a Holocaust survivor. In this moment, Simone's mind is taken away into the past once more, and he feels as if he's still a young man, sticking a note behind a statue in a park for his love to come and read in secret. Simone fails to sleep that night, and so does Giovanna. By the window, they are having a conversation about marriage. As it turns out, Giovanna and Filippo have been married for 9 years. They were together long before that as well, but back then everything was different. Simone responds that it must be beautiful to see how something much more meaningful blooms out of the love that starts out as a mere passion. To nurture this love and protect it from fading away into life's ordinariness, it must be a privilege to spectate. Unexpectedly, music starts playing outside, and Simone offers to dance. Holding her hand, he feels like a young man, surrounded by his Jewish neighbors back in the 1940s. A vision of one man dancing with his date particularly attracts his attention. The next morning, Giovanna tries to tell Filippo everything that happened last night, including the part about Lorenzo, but the man acts indifferent and uninterested. Since he shows no intention to listen, Giovanna doesn't get out of her way to put more effort into this conversation. She decides to tell him sometime later. In a few hours, after sending the kids to school, she brings Simone's clothes to a dry cleaning together with Emine. After hearing the story, she pushes the idea that Lorenzo is surely coming to her. As it seems to her, the man has been spying on her and is now trying to use his chance to get closer to her. He can't be truly interested in Simone's fate. As Giovanna tries to prove the opposite, the woman who works there praises the old man's suit, saying that it is made out of a great fabric. She also finds some things in its pockets and hands them to Giovanna, There seemed to have been some rocks, a lighter, and a piece of paper in Simone's pockets. Suddenly, before they exit the dry cleaning, Giovanna receives a call from Lorenzo. He asks her if she can meet him at the same cafe. As she agrees, Emine teases her for starting a relationship outside of her marriage. After arriving at the cafe, Giovanna learns that Lorenzo called a police officer he knows. As he was told, there were no reports made about a missing person on the streets. Filippo must have lied about going to the police station. Anyway, if anything comes up, Lorenzo will know. When Giovanna expresses that she cannot stay here for long, they hurry and start walking in the Jewish neighborhood. Here, the man shows that Emine's words about his spying were somewhat true. As it turns out, Lorenzo knows almost everything about Giovanna's routine. He's been watching her for a very long time and has been noting the details that an indifferent person wouldn't care about. In the next scene, the duo enters a Jewish tailor's shop and asks if the owner knows an old man by the name of Simone. This is the exact spot that Simone banged on last night. The young man who works there says that he doesn't, but an old woman behind the curtains seems to be quite stirred up after hearing the name. As we soon learned, her brother had the same name, but he couldn't survive the concentration camp, even though a glimpse of hope must be appearing in their hearts that Simone is alive. They still say that they are no longer looking for him. After exiting the shop, Giovanna calls the house to make sure Simone is all right, but nobody answers. She was hoping that Filippo was going to take care of him, but as it turns out, the man is nowhere to be found. Giovanna rushes home then and finds the apartment empty. Simone seems to have wandered off again, and Filippo is nowhere to be found as well. When the man arrives, he says that he was at the bar, but his word cannot be trusted anymore. He lied about the report at the police station, so he might be lying about this as well. When the man tries to protect himself, he decides to fight back and accuse Giovanna of everything. And so, the inevitable happens, and the couple begins quarreling. Filippo's night shifts, his scarcely paying job, his lies, and the fact that he has zero intention to change anything are brought into the discussion. Filippo is clearly cornered, so he fights with whatever is available to him. Intending to hurt her and win the argument, he brings her unhelpful parents into the conversation and uses brute force to intimidate and silence her. Clearly, this relationship is spiraling downward. After Filippo leaves, Giovanna reads the letter they found in Simone's pocket. Here, she learns that Simone's real name is David Verily, and that the name Simone belongs to his lover. The writer of the letter is drowning deeply in the magnificence of enormous feelings. The pain and the secrecy of his quietly meaningful relationship bring unforgettable memories to the surface of his consciousness. Now that Simone is gone from his life, and their love lives on only in their hearts, colors are nowhere to be found. When Lorenzo reads this letter in the next scene, he realizes just how much he emphasizes the author. As it turns out, he is being transferred somewhere far away, and in a few days, he will have to leave this city for good. Before today, he even dreamt of this huge promotion, but now he wants nothing more than to be left sitting at this bench together with Giovanna. This is a tendency that his life often shows. He starts dreaming about something, and it is given to him only at the cost of something much more meaningful. He expresses it all to Giovanna then, and just before the words "I love you" leave his mouth, Giovanna leans over to him abruptly and kisses him firmly. The next morning, using this letter, Giovanna manages to find the trace of David. As it turns out, the man is living with a maid in a huge house. He appears to be really rich, and the maid appears to be quite tired of his constant game of hide and seek. Still, she takes care of him and wants Giovanna to speak to him briefly and try not to upset him too much. David, who welcomes her warmly, tells her a little more about his relationship with Simone. As it turns out, the morning when Filippo found him, he was walking from their secret meeting place near a fountain in a park. This is where they would hide their secret coded messages. After a delightful, calm, and wholehearted conversation, Giovanna is invited to have dinner with him. The two prepare food together in the next scene. The amount of knowledge David seems to own is incredible. As they bake a cake together, Giovanna learns a lot from him. Baking has always been a hobby for her, but in David's kitchen, she feels that there is still a chance to turn it into something bigger. Before leaving, she learns from the maid that David used to own a pastry shop in the city. Being an extremely talented chef, his art was known all over Europe. As it turns out, the maid owes him her life. On October 16, 1943, at the break of dawn, he warned a lot of children, men and women, that the Nazis were trying to take the entire population of Jews into captivity. Consequently, he saved a lot of lives that day, but he had to sacrifice a lot for it too. From the maid's perspective, Giovanna doesn't appreciate the full scope of how privileged she is to have baked with David. The old man never lets anyone into his kitchen. That night, Giovanna talked to Lorenzo over the phone for hours. The connection between them grows so quickly that Giovanna finds herself wanting to speak about him with Emine the next morning. The woman maintains the same skeptical attitude towards this relationship as before. From her perspective, sex is all Lorenzo wants. The feeling that he has cannot be called true love, and if Giovanna wants to get him out of her head, there is only one thing she can do. She must sleep with him and make it count. Naturally, Giovanna doesn't agree with the first part of Emine's point. Evidence that is available to her speaks to the fact that Lorenzo feels something very real towards her. This clash of views, however, doesn't mean that she won't use her second opinion. That night, she leaves her children at Emine's place, makes herself pretty, and goes over to Lorenzo's place, who has been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Finally, he can hold her in his arms, kiss her lips, and kiss her face. His obsession has finally reached its conclusion. After a long and passionate episode in which, bit by bit, Lorenzo speaks about how he would watch her from behind the curtains, Giovanna sees his window and asks to be let go for a moment. Standing up, she goes over to the window, from which loving eyes have been watching her for years. Opening the curtains, she sees her family, Filippo, the kids, and Emine, who takes them. Finally, she even sees a vision of herself smoking a cigarette that gradually fades away. Once she walks away from the window, her mind is clear. Now she can realize that this relationship has no future. It cannot possibly work in this world. And no matter how hard it is for both, she must leave. Lorenzo embraces her from behind and gets on his knees. Grasping her hands, he grieves over their impossible love and scolds their fate. There is no use in pointless promises. He knows the truth, and he lets her go. The next morning after work, Giovanna picks up David's suit from the dry cleaning and brings it over to his house. She intends to just drop them off and get back home, but the maid asks her to enter and see the old man. He seems to be having the strongest flashback episodes. The emotions have risen inside him so much that he fails to recognize the present and past. Distancing from reality, the memories that took place years ago are having the same velocity and effect on the old man that they had back then. At the bakery where he fought for his life, this memory, the primary one from his past, is more vividly shown in the next scene, when David tells Giovanna what happened on that fateful night. As he tells the story, we see the young David overhearing a conversation between a Nazi officer and a baker who works with him. They are saying that a grand imprisonment is about to take place in less than an hour, and that the Jew who works here at the bakery should be well taken care of so that he doesn't get away. The baker assures him that the boy won't possibly manage to be that heroic, but in any case, he will ensure that he is well placed here. What happens afterwards, we already know. David murders this baker, escapes, and stands at a crossroads. As the old man now says, this was the most important crossroads of his life and the most important decision. He had two choices. He could either go directly to Simone and save him or go off into the ghetto and inform everyone of the upcoming raids. As he says, the only reason he chose to do the latter was to prove to his neighbors that he was a great man. They would always pick on him for liking other men, and the young David wanted to prove to everyone that he wasn't as lousy as they thought he was, and that he could also be heroic. David hates his decision now. What happened, though? He's no longer standing at the crossroads now, but as he can see, Giovanna is. This is why he urges her not to repeat young David's mistake. She must choose her love over everything. The next morning, when Filippo comes home from work, he finds his wife sitting in the living room. She seems sleepless and tired, but as it appears, she wants to talk about something. Anxiously, Filippo sits beside her and listens as she shares her decision with him. She wants to quit her current job and start working at a pastry. She must have done it earlier, but from her perspective, it isn't too late now. Filippo doesn't say anything. This would mean that the main portion of income will be put off from the table for a while, and that he will have to take more financial responsibilities. Giovanna pleads him for help. She needs to this. Filippo doesn't respond, but that night, Giovanna sees him sitting by the table in the living room, sobbing his heart out silently. In a few hours, Emine sees Lorenzo filling the back of his car with baggage and preparing to leave with grieving eyes. Giovanna is hugging her daughter, giving her encouragement for the day when Emine walks inside through the main door, as if she were family. Once the daughter leaves, she informs him about Lorenzo's leaving, but Giovanna doesn't pay much heed to this news at first. And so, the man stands outside after finishing up the packing process and gazes at the window he used to watch for such a long time. He hopes to see her face, but Giovanna is still in her kitchen, preparing cookies restlessly. Finally, she surrenders to the urge to see him for the last time and gets down. Following David's advice, She chooses to go to her love. But when she finally appears in the street, Lorenzo is nowhere to be found. And so, as time passes, new couples start living in the facing window. Giovanna manages to start working at a pastry, and Filippo finally gets a day shift. On a much sorrowful note, David sadly passes away, but he leaves something extremely important behind, something he lost during the course of his long life. As paradoxical as it might sound, he leaves behind memories that will ensure that Giovanna is never alone, even when the face of Lorenzo, her love, begins disappearing in the unending layers of her mind.